Theoretically, all the dragon cultivators were qualified to become an inspector of the Dragon God Shrine. There was a series of exams one had to take in order to become an inspector, and those exams were held annually. Some of the cultivators would enroll themselves in the exams. Some were recommended by the local forces. Others, such as Jacob, became assisting inspectors first before the official inspectors referred them. There were two parts to the exams, one written exam and one combat exam. The written exam isn't supposed to be too difficult. One could pass it if they were familiar with the fundamental information of the dragon tribe, as well as all the regulations of the tribe. It was the combat exam that was more competitive. All kinds of masters from 3rd level to 8th level would gather in the Dragon God Shrine, and only the top 10 participants would become official inspectors after rounds of a fierce battle. The next 40 of them would become assisting inspectors. A while back, Susan went through the exams and became an official inspector as a 7th level master. Since the status of the 4 ocean dragon clans was similar to that of the Dragon God Shrine, their core members weren't interested in these exams. However, for other dragon clans, the more inspectors they had in the Dragon God Shrine, the higher they were regarded. Although the inspectors claimed to be impartial when they dealt with issues for the Dragon God Shrine, they always had their biases. For example, since Susan was brought up in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, she had always been easy on them for all their matters. Jonah was an elite trained by an Earth Elemental Dragon clan. They expected him to fight all the way through the inspector exams this year and become an official inspector. 5th level, Jacob murmured to himself as he let out a sword energy, chopping down a line of trees smoothly. Although they were only one realm apart, Jacob and Snowflake weren't even able to damage Jonah's hair with all their strength combined. It sure wasn't a nice feeling when someone pointed his sword that close to your forehead. Strength. It all came down to strength. The teleportation array lit up again. Elder Frank was standing on the array, and he quickly walked toward the forest. As short as he was, he appeared to be very capable. Elder Frank. Jacob smiled in embarrassment as he walked over. He smiled at Jacob. Well done, Prince. Jacob looked around and got even more embarrassed. I'm not talking about this. Elder Frank put his hands behind him and said, I am talking about the damage on the South Atlantic Dragon Palace. Oh? Jacob was surprised at the sudden change of topic. The news of you and the Little Master destroying half of the South Atlantic Dragon Palace is out. All the parties are astonished by the news. Elder Frank slightly sighed. Jacob sensed the importance of this topic, so he focused on what Elder Frank was saying. Sure enough, the elder kept talking. The entire dragon tribe has been talking about this today, especially our water elemental dragon clans. A few rivers and lake dragon clans have started to communicate, discussing how to cope with the situation. Cope with the situation? Jacob was confused. You and Noah destroyed the South Atlantic Dragon Palace. No one feels safe at home anymore. If Noah had enough interest in it, he could rob any other clan after South Atlantic. Then he could go ahead and set fire on some lake dragon palace. Elder Frank continued. Jacob started to understand. Noah destroyed half of the South Atlantic Dragon Palace in rage, so the other dragon clans were deterred by the potential danger. If some group took this opportunity to promote the idea that North Atlantic wanted to conquer every other dragon clan, many forces would take precautions against North Atlantic. That would put North Atlantic in an isolated situation. It had never occurred to Jacob that the damage he and Noah caused for the South Atlantic Dragon Palace would put North Atlantic in so much trouble. Instead of utilizing this opportunity to take the South Atlantic Dragon Clan's territories and resources, the East and West Dragon Clans formed an alliance with the South Atlantic Dragon Clan against the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. Other small powers also grouped up with each other. They each formed alliances before the North Atlantic Dragon Clan could expand rapidly. Fighting with the South Atlantic Dragon Palace at this time would go to prove North Atlantic's wild ambition and conspiracy. However, if the North Atlantic stood back and let them team up, the clan would lose the relationship with many small powers and damage the relationship with the other few major powers, putting them into a dead corner. Elder Frank thought for a bit when he noticed Jacob's frowning face. He comforted, "Prince, you don't need to worry too much about it. The South Atlantic Dragon Palace won't be able to recover for at least 30 to 50 years, and that is a good thing for us. However, instead of being buried with it, we need to keep our status. There are only two ways to solve the situation. First, we can call for an early Dragon Tribe conference and state our stance. Second, if we can get a Heavenly Dragon Realm Grandmaster within a year and truly surpass the strength of the other three Ocean Dragon clans, then this won't be an issue. However, it is already an open secret that the Third Lord failed the Heavenly Tribulation." "State our stance? What do you mean by that?" Jacob asked. Elder Frank hesitated for a few seconds before he answered at last. "To state that we didn't mean to cause the damage, and if we had to..." He sighed before saying, "Please treat Ms. Soph nicely." Jacob didn't understand Elder Frank's words. When he was about to ask again, Elder Frank returned to the first topic. "Prince, who were you fighting with?" "A 5th-level cultivator from the Earth Elemental Dragon Clan. Do you know anything about him, Elder Frank?" Jacob asked. "Is he a young cultivator?" Elder Frank asked. "Yeah, around 20 or so." "His name is Jonah, indeed a 5th-level cultivator," Elder Frank answered promptly. Elder Frank's intelligence network was one of the powerful weapons of the North Atlantic Dragon Clan, and the information about the young elite member from an Earth Elemental clan was part of his intelligence data, since the young man was now in their city and practiced in his academy. He didn't expect that Jacob would fight with him. If Elder Frank didn't sense the vibrations of the array formation, he wouldn't have come into the forest to investigate the situation in person. Seeing Jacob's silence, Elder Frank continued. "He is a superstar in the Earth Elemental Dragon Clan. He has reached the 5th level at such a young age and has the greatest hope of reaching the 8th level." Jacob knew that the masters on the 7th and 8th level in Dragon Tribe were mostly elderlies who were hundreds of years old. Susan was a rare exception. Tom looked young, but he was much older than Susan. Jonah was indeed a genius to have reached 5th level in his early 20s and thus had great prospects. The Water Elemental Dragon Clan had 4 branches: Stream, River, Lake, and Ocean, and it had the largest number of cultivators and naturally the most amount of 7th and 8th levels. In contrast, the combined members of Metal, Wood, Fire, and Earth Elemental Dragon Clans couldn't surpass that of the 4 Ocean Dragon Palaces. The more 7th and 8th level cultivators a Dragon Clan had, the more respect they got. As a core member of the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, Jacob had seen many 7th and 8th level elders and didn't find them rare. But, in fact, those were all the higher level masters in the city. Only the top 4 Ocean Dragon Palaces had over 100 higher level masters who were the equivalent of top-tier nascent Soul Realm. The second largest group of 7th and 8th level masters were the Metal Essence Dragon Clans. That was why this Earth Elemental Dragon, who had reached 5th level at the age of 20, carried the hope of the entire Earth Elemental Dragon Clan. He will be attending this year's Dragon God Shrine's general examination, right? Jacob asked Elder Frank. It's possible. Susan chose to enter the inspector system to break through from 7th level to 8th level. The Dragon God Shrine has a large collection of secret cultivation scrolls and thus provides more information and training opportunities. The resources the Dragon God Shrine has can surpass our North Atlantic Dragon Clan, Elder Frank said. Jacob nodded. Although Susan was adopted and raised by Elder Kayla, she was still an outsider and couldn't become a core member of the North Atlantic Dragon Clan. Thus, she had no access to the top cultivation techniques. That was why she entered the Dragon God Shrine and became an inspector. The 4 Ocean Dragon Palaces were big players with abundant resources, and the smaller Dragon Kings of lakes and rivers had to borrow technique scrolls from them. Those dragon forces without this access had no choice but to fight to become inspectors. Okay, I got it. Jacob tossed Snowflake into his necklace before walking to the teleportation array. He suddenly felt something trickle down his forehead, so raised his hand to check and felt something wet. He then lowered his hand and saw a trace of red blood on his fingers. Jonah had stopped his sword at the most crucial moment, but he had still left a shallow, symbolic cut on his forehead. That cut on his forehead was in the center of the 3 golden flames mark, which signified that Jacob was an assisting inspector. It was an act of jealousy and a challenge. In Jonah's eyes, Jacob was only an insignificant 3rd-level cultivator, but he had acquired the position of an assisting inspector just because he was a member of the North Atlantic. Likewise, only 4 Ocean Dragon Palaces owned such powerful sword array techniques. However, he didn't care about Jacob's position as the assisting inspector, since he believed that he could defeat Jacob in a battle in the Dragon God Shrine. Jonah. Jacob murmured the name of the 5th-level cultivator and rubbed the trace of blood on his fingertips, feeling the small amount of pain on his forehead. Strength. The key lies in strength.